Okay. Hi guys. Thank you for doing this over the weekend. I really appreciate it. So it's going to be a really quick set of notes on community interactions in an ecosystem. So on Friday we talked about food webs and food chains, and they're about predator-prey interactions, one organism eating another. But there are many types of community interactions that are not predator-prey, and they're a little bit more interesting because of the types of relationships that we can talk about. So we know this, organisms interact with each other when they share the same habitat, which is their address, or their niche, which is their job. So if I have two organisms that occupy the same habitat, of course they're going to interact with each other because they're part of the same community. And if they are trying to share the same niche, which means the same job, like remember our zebra, its job was to be an herbivore, to eat the grass in its ecosystem, then they're going to compete with each other for that resource, for that grass. And that gets us into the types of interactions that you see. So we have competition, predator-prey, which we talked about with our food chains and food webs, and then three types of what we call symbiosis. So there's one called commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism, and we'll talk about each of those. Okay, so competition. It's pretty much what you think it is. So there is a resource, food, water, mates, shelter, and organisms are going to compete for it. So it must make sense that those organisms have to be in the same place at the same time. If they weren't, then they wouldn't compete for the resource. So you can see in our picture, we have two gazelle or antelope, I'm not sure which they are, I do not remember, and they are males, clearly, and they're probably fighting over access to breed with the females. So that's competition. So they're the same species. And then in the other picture, you have your hyenas trying to steal a kill from a lion. So two different species competing for the same resource, which at this point is food. So you can have competition in organisms of the same species and between organisms of different species. What's important is the resource that they are competing for. So just like I said, it could be food, mate, territory, water, any resource that is going to help these organisms survive, number one, and then mate to pass on their genes. Predation, easy one, we all know this. So one organism is going to capture and kill another organism. So here we have our wildebeest being hunted and maybe killed by a lion. So the lion is the predator, the wildebeest in this situation is the prey species. And I will link up this kind of cool Komodo dragon hunting a buffalo video for you because you can't click it through here, but I'll link it up for you through Canvas. You can watch it. I definitely recommend that you watch it. It's really, really cool. And Komodo dragons are kind of like real life dinosaurs. At least that's how I kind of view them. And then we have symbiosis. So symbiosis is a broad umbrella that encompasses three other types of very close relationships. So in general, it's a relationship where two different species live very, very closely together. And then we can get more specific as into how they are affecting each other in that relationship. The first one is mutualism. So in this type of relationship, both species are going to get a benefit, get a good outcome from the relationship. In the picture to the left, we have a fish, a clownfish, in a sea anemone. And we all should know this from Finding Nemo. The clownfish live in the anemone and they have to constantly brush up against it to kind of become immune to the stings of the anemone. So the clownfish then protects the anemone, and then the fish gets a place to live where it is also protected. So they both get a really good benefit from it. And the anemone also kind of gets a little cleaner. And then the bee and the flower, a very classic example of mutualism. We have our bee who is coming in here and looking for pollen, looking for nectar. He's looking for nectar. He's not really caring about the pollen. But the pollen gets stuck on all of his little hairs on his legs. And then, as he flies to the next flower, if it's of the same species, he can then pollinate or fertilize that flower and propagate the species. He's not doing it intentionally, but it's really, really important that this happen. Some flowers and insects are actually so closely, they have such a close relationship that one cannot exist without the other. And if one goes, then the other will go as well. So it can be really important. So here's just in words what I was just saying. Flowers depend on bees to pollinate them. Flowers reproduce and bees are getting the food. And then we also have our anemone example. Another example of mutualism. If you see in this picture, we have 2 buffalo and we have some birds hitching a ride on the back of one of the buffalo. They're not just there to get a ride. The birds are actually going to get food. So what they're going to do is they're going to pick insects and parasites off of the buffalo. So ticks, fleas, any type of insect that's going to live on the buffalo in its fur, that's what the birds are going to eat. And the buffalo, they don't mind. The birds are not hurting them. They're actually helping them. They're getting cleaned and they're getting protection from the parasites. So that is a mutualistic relationship, a plus for the buffalo and a plus for the birds. So the next type, remember there are 3 types, the next type of symbiosis is commensalism. This is when one species gets a clear benefit and the other is not affected, it's not hurt or helped by the relationship. So if you notice on this whale, on its fin, it has little white dots. You've seen those before, so those are barnacles. And you've probably seen them on rocks down at the shore. I doubt you've seen them like on a whale up close. But what they do is that they grow on the whale, so they're actually living organisms. So they have like this little mound around them and the organism's actually inside. And what they do is they attach to the whale, they grow on him, and the whale doesn't mind, it doesn't hurt him or her in any way, or doesn't help either, but definitely doesn't hurt. And the barnacles are filter feeders, so they're filtering food out of the water. And as the whale swims along, the water is constantly passing over the barnacle, allowing constant feeding, or at least higher access to food. So, again, there in words, whale does not care either way, and the barnacles are going to get a major plus because they get constant new water filtering over them to get the food out of it. So really, really good food source. Another example is in this beautiful picture right here in the rainforest. Many organisms have very close relationships, but this is a commensalism one. So we have our trunk of our tree going up, a hardwood tree, and we have an orchid growing on it. It's probably growing very high up on this tree. You can't really tell from the picture, but you can tell it's getting sunlight. Because if the orchid were to grow on the ground, it would not have access to that sunlight. So what it does is it grows literally on the tree. The tree is not harmed. It doesn't care that the plant's not sucking nutrients out of it or water out of it. It's literally just kind of hanging on to the edge. And that way, the orchids get more access to sunlight, and the tree is also going to be unaffected by this. It doesn't actually hurt it in any way. A bird building a nest in a tree is the same thing. And then we have parasitism, one you are all familiar with. So we have one species, which is the parasite, that feeds on but doesn't kill, that's really important, doesn't kill another. So it's the host. The parasite is not intending to kill the host. Sometimes it happens accidentally if a dog gets too many ticks on it. They're drawing too much blood out of the dog and the dog can die. And you have to have a massive, massive amount. But it can happen, but it's not the intention of the parasite, because if they kill their host, then they have to find new hosts. They have to find a new place to live. So we have a couple of examples. You have a tick host feeding on a deer or on a dog or on you. I'm sure you've all had experience with a tick being on you. In this bottom corner, the deer, those are all ticks in the bottom left-hand corner on the back of that deer's ears. Fleas are a parasite, so the flea picture is right above the deer, and fleas feed on your cats and dogs. They generally don't really like humans to feed on. There are certain fleas that have preferences on what they would like to feed on, so there's cat fleas and dog fleas. And then super gross, intestinal parasites. So we have two more pictures here and here of intestinal parasites, and you can get them. This is why there's rules about how long you should cook things like pork or things like beef, because you could get a parasite. It's not very common, but you could get a parasite from it, and a tapeworm will grow very, very, very long. So they're sucking the nutrients. If people have a tapeworm, they're not getting all the nutrients of the food that they're eating because the tapeworm is siphoning off those nutrients for itself. And then you can actually shed, like if your dog gets a tapeworm, which is why when you take them to the vet, they give them a dewormer. They actually, in their fecal matter, they'll poop out parts of the worm that are used for reproduction. So then if another organism comes in contact with that fecal matter, they can then pick up those worm eggs and get the parasite themselves. So we have a plus for the parasite, it's getting a benefit out of it, and a negative effect on the host. Generally not death, but definitely a negative effect. And that is all. I hope you got all of the notes. Please go watch that Komodo dragon video that I'm going to link up in Canvas too. You do not need to do the back of your notes sheet. We're going to do that in class. And remember, you have a quiz on Monday toward the end of class. We're going to review some stuff beforehand. All right, have a good rest of your weekend, guys.